She thought she'd die tonight, but the mafia boss said, "You'll only sleep in my bed." The smell of burnt coffee and old grease was a permanent part of Ava's clothes. It clung to her hair, her skin, and she was sure, her soul. It was 2:30 in the morning on a Tuesday, and the Nighthawk Diner was finally empty. The last customer, a trucker with eyes like cracked pavement, had left a 50-cent tip and a smear of ketchup on the vinyl counter. Ava sighed, the sound lost in the hum of the ancient fluorescent lights overhead. She was exhausted, not just tired. This was a deep, bone-grinding weariness that had been building for months. Her feet ached inside her worn-out sneakers, a dull throb that kept time with the anxious beat of her heart. Rent was late again. The crumpled envelope in her apron pocket held maybe $60 in ones and fives, a pathetic fraction of what she owed. This part of the city never slept, but it never really lived, either. It just existed in a low, dangerous hum of its own. Sirens were the local bird song, every shift. She promised herself this was the last one. Every morning, she was back, pouring coffee for men who looked right through her. "Just get through tonight," she muttered, grabbing the leaking black trash bag from its can. "Just get home, lock the door, and sleep for a week." She pushed open the back door, the hinges screaming in protest. The cold, damp air of the alley hit her instantly, sharp with the stench of urine and rotting garbage. She hated this part. The single bulb above the door was broken, leaving the narrow space in near total darkness, save for the weak yellow light spilling from the diner's window. She hurried toward the dumpster, her sneakers sliding on the slick pavement. She just wanted to drop the bag and run back inside. That's when she heard it. Not a gunshot, not a yell, a thud, a wet, heavy sound, followed by a low, desperate gurgle. Ava froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was hidden by the shadow of the dumpster, but she could see them. 2 men, 20 feet away. One man was on his knees, his hands clasped as if in prayer. The other stood over him, a tall silhouette against the faint light of the street lamp at the alley's mouth. She watched, paralyzed. As the standing man moved, there was a glint of metal, not a gun, something else. He was efficient. There was no wasted motion, just a brutal, downward arc. The kneeling man made no sound. He just folded. He collapsed onto the pavement like a puppet with its strings cut. Ava's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. The killer didn't move for a long second. He stood over the body, his head slightly tilted. Then, slowly, he turned. He looked right at her. He could not have seen her. She was in the dark. He could not. But he did. His face was pale in the gloom, features sharp and cold. He wasn't wearing a mask. And he was looking right at her. He saw her. He saw her face. The trash bag slipped from her numb fingers, splitting open as it hit the ground. The clatter of an empty beer bottle rolling on the concrete was cannon fire in the silence. She didn't wait. She scrambled backward, her hands scraping against the rough brick wall. She fell, ripping the knee of her jeans, and crab-walked backward before finding her feet. She slammed into the diner's back door, fumbling with the handle, and fell inside, locking the deadbolt with a trembling hand. She leaned against the door, her entire body shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She couldn't breathe. She had to breathe. Her phone. She ripped it from her apron. Her fingers were stiff, useless. She stabbed at the screen. 911. "What is your emergency?" "The alley," Ava whispered, sliding down the door to sit on the grimy floor. "Outside the Nighthawk Diner. A man. He killed... Oh, God. He killed him. He's dead. Ma'am, slow down." "Who is dead?" "A man in the alley. He was... Please, hurry. The killer. He saw me. He saw my face." It took them 20 minutes. 20 minutes Ava spent huddled under the counter, peering over the formica edge at the front door, convinced the man from the alley was going to walk in. When the blue and red lights finally flashed through the diner windows, she cried out in relief. 2 officers pushed open the door, hands on their holsters, their expressions bored. "The one who called?" the older one asked. "Yes, out back, in the alley. He's..." They walked past her, their boots heavy on the tile. She followed them, her legs feeling like water. The older cop shined a heavy flashlight into the alley. It was empty. "No," Ava whispered, stepping out into the cold. "No, he was right here." She pointed at the spot. The other man. He was right here. There was no body. There was no blood. There was only her split trash bag, its contents, coffee grounds, napkins, broken glass, spilled across the pavement. "There's nothing here, miss," the younger cop said, his tone laced with annoyance. "But I saw him. He was tall. He looked right at me." "Look," the older one said, his voice a gravelly sigh. "It's late. You're tired. Sometimes the shadows play tricks." "This wasn't a shadow. It was an execution." The cop shared a look. It was a look she knew well, the look that dismissed her, the look that said she was just a tired waitress in a bad neighborhood, probably seeing things, probably not worth the paperwork. "Maybe one of the bums got into a fight," the younger one offered. "He wasn't a bum," Ava said, her voice rising. "He was murdered." "File a report if you want," the older cop said, already turning to leave. "But we can't do anything about a body that isn't here." He paused and put a hand on her shoulder. It felt less like comfort and more like a warning. "Go home, miss. Get some sleep." They left. The alley was silent again, except for the distant wail of another, unrelated siren. Ava stood alone, the spilled trash at her feet, a cold certainty settling in her stomach. They hadn't just moved the body. They had cleaned it. That fast, that thoroughly. This was not a random fight. This was something organized, and they knew her face. She didn't walk home. She ran. The paranoia set in before she'd gone 2 blocks. Every car that slowed, every shadow that moved, was him. She kept ducking into doorways, her head on a swivel, her keys clutched in her fist like a weapon. Halfway home, she saw it, a dark sedan, an old model, parked across the street from her apartment building's entrance. It was too dark to see inside, but she could see the faint orange cherry of a cigarette being smoked. It was parked in a no-parking zone. Ava stopped, her blood turning to ice. It had passed her twice on the walk. She realized she had dismissed it as city traffic. She didn't go to her apartment. She turned, walked calmly to the corner, and then ran again, ducking into an all-night bodega. She bought a pack of gum she couldn't afford and slipped out the back exit into another alley. She spent the next 3 hours in a 24-hour laundromat, watching the door, jumping every time the dryers buzzed. She was being watched. She had nowhere to go. There was one option, one desperate, last-ditch plan. The bus station, there was an 8 o'clock bus to Chicago. From there, she could go anywhere. She had about $200 saved in her bank account, enough for a one-way ticket and a few days of survival. At 5 in the morning, she walked to the ATM in the lobby of a brightly lit bank. She was shaking, but she was moving. She put in her card. She typed her PIN. She hit withdrawal. Insufficient funds. "No," she whispered. She tried again. Maybe she typed it wrong. Card declined. See teller. Frantic, she called the automated number on the back of the card. She navigated the menu, her fingers fumbling. "Your current checking account balance is negative $1,214. Ava leaned her head against the cold glass of the ATM booth. That was impossible. "Your account has been frozen," the automated voice continued, "due to a pending fraud investigation." The floor dropped out from under her. Derek, her ex-boyfriend, the one who had borrowed her Social Security number to set up the utilities, the one who had vanished 6 months ago, the charges he'd made, the debts he'd racked up in her name. They had finally caught up, and they had caught up today. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a death sentence. She had no money. She had no home to go to. The sun was coming up, and the men who killed for a living were looking for her. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She ran back to the only place she had a key, the diner. It was closed. The "Sorry, we're closed" sign hung crookedly in the window. She slipped her key into the back door lock, the one the police had used. She locked it behind her, then flipped the deadbolt. She was safe. For a minute. She couldn't stay in the main dining room. The windows were too big. She ran to the dry pantry. A small, windowless room filled with industrial-sized cans of tomato sauce and sacks of flour. She sat on a bag of rice, pulled the door almost shut, and buried her face in her hands. She didn't mean to fall asleep. It was just that the exhaustion, the terror, and the adrenaline had finally coalesced into a heavy, suffocating blanket. She dozed, her dreams filled with dark alleys and cold, empty eyes. She was woken by a sound, a click. The click of the diner's front door lock turning. Ava's heart stopped. It was 7 in the morning. Her boss, Sal, didn't come in until 10. She held her breath, listening, footsteps heavy, unhurried. They walked across the dining room. They stopped. She could hear the person breathing, or maybe it was just the blood roaring in her own ears. The pantry door, the one she had left cracked open, swung wide. Ava was blinded by the light from the dining room. A silhouette stood in the doorway, tall, impossibly broad. He filled the entire frame, blocking the light. He didn't move. He just stood there, looking down at her huddled among the cans. She scrambled to her feet, backing up until she hit the wall, sending a can of peaches tumbling to the floor. He stepped into the pantry, and the dim light fell on his face. He was not the man from the alley. This man was different. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. His shirt was black. His hair was black, swept back from a face that was all hard angles and cold authority. He looked like he was carved from marble. But it was his eyes that held her. They were dark, cold, and assessing. They saw everything. They saw her terror, her ripped jeans, the flower on her cheek. He said her name, Ava. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. It was a claim. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "How do you know my name?" The man, this stranger, took another step. He didn't look like the kind of man who belonged in a greasy spoon diner. He looked like the kind of man who owned the building, the block, the city. Vincent Romano watched the girl. His network had been fast, a witness to a Serpenti hit, a waitress named Ava. The Serpenti were sloppy, and now they were scrambling to clean up their mess. His source said they'd had a man on her apartment all night. Another one had just called in a favor at her bank. They were boxing her in. He hadn't intended to come himself, but something about the report had intrigued him. The girl who called the cops got dismissed and still managed to evade the tail. Now, looking at her, he understood. She was terrified. She was vibrating with it, but she wasn't crying. Her chin was up, and her eyes, wide with fear, also held a spark of pure, unadulterated defiance. She was trembling, yet proud. She was a cornered animal, but she was still deciding whether to flee or to bite. "You saw something you shouldn't have," Vincent said. His voice was low, smooth, but it filled the small room. I don't know what you're talking about." A weak, pathetic lie. "You talked to the police," he continued, ignoring her. "And now the men you saw are coming to make sure you don't talk again, permanently. Who are you? Are you with them?" A flicker of something, amusement, disgust, crossed his features. "I am not with them." He took a step closer, and Ava pressed herself harder against the wall. He could smell her fear, and underneath it, the scent of coffee and peaches. "They know you're here. They know you have nowhere to run." The blood drained from her face. How do you know about my bank? I know everything." He let the simple statement hang in the air. "I'm offering you a choice, Ava. It is the only one you will get." He held out a hand. It was a large hand, clean, with a heavy gold ring on his pinky. "You can stay here. Wait for them. They will find you before Sal gets here to open up." He paused. "Or you can come with me." She stared at his hand. "Come with you? Why? Why would you help me?" "Because I am the only person in this city they are afraid of." That was the truth. It hit her with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a rescue. This was a transaction, a change of ownership. She was drowning, and this man was offering her a hand. But she knew. that if she took it, she would belong to him. She looked from his hand to his cold, unblinking eyes. She thought of the man in the alley. She thought of the man smoking in the car. She thought of the negative balance in her bank account. She was going to die today. In a haze of fear and exhaustion, she made her choice. She didn't take his hand. She couldn't. But she nodded. A single, jerky motion. "Good," he said. He turned and walked out of the pantry, not checking to see if she followed. He knew she would. She did. The car was a black sedan, long and low. It looked like a panther, all silent muscle and dark glass. He opened the back door for her. She slid in. The leather seats were cold and smelled faintly of cigar smoke and polish. It was the cleanest place she'd ever been. He got in the driver's seat. The engine started with a deep, quiet rumble. He drove. His movements economical and precise. The silence was a living thing. It was heavier than any conversation. The windows were so dark she couldn't see out, and she knew no one could see in. They were just a dark shape gliding through the morning city. The adrenaline was gone now, replaced by a crushing, leaden despair. A single, hot tear escaped her eye and rolled down her cold cheek. She wiped it away, angry at her own weakness. She had to know. Her voice was a croak. "What happens now?" He didn't answer. He just kept driving. She tried again, the last scrap of her defiance fueling her. "Are you going to kill me?" He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on the road, his jaw set, his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He turned the car, a smooth motion into a dark underground garage. The gate rumbled shut behind them, plunging them into a sudden, echoing darkness. He stopped the car. He killed the engine. The silence was absolute. He turned his head. In the shadows, his face was just a collection of hard planes, his eyes black holes. "You'll only sleep," he said, his voice a low promise in the dark, "in my bed." The elevator did not make a sound. It simply moved, a silent, pressurized box of brushed steel and glass, lifting them so high and so fast that Ava's ears popped in the quiet. Vincent stood beside her, not touching, not looking at her, but his presence was a physical weight in the small space. He was a pillar of dark wool and cold anger, and she was a stray, still wearing yesterday's diner uniform. Her knees scraped raw and her hair tangled with alley filth. The doors opened onto not a hallway, but the apartment itself. Ava's first thought was that no one lived here. It was not a home. It was a statement. The floor was black marble, polished to a mirror shine, reflecting a wall of glass that seemed to hold back the entire city. The lights of 1,000 buildings glittered below them. A carpet of diamonds laid at their feet. The air was cold, smelling faintly of metal and ozone. Everything was chrome, black leather or gray steel. It was the most beautiful, most terrifying place she had ever seen. It was a cage made of money. "This way." His voice echoed in the cavernous space. He led her down a long, white hallway that felt more like a gallery than a corridor. He stopped at a door and pushed it open. "You'll stay here. The bathroom is through there. There are clothes in the closet. Don't leave the room." It wasn't a guest room. It was a luxury suite. The bed was large enough for 6 people, piled with white pillows. The carpet was so thick she felt her ankles sink into it. Like the rest of the penthouse, it was beautiful, sterile, and cold. The tension was a third person in the room, a heavy, suffocating presence. She was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the command, for the price of this rescue. He just looked at her. His dark eyes raked over her, from her matted hair to her dirty sneakers. He saw the tremble in her hands, the bruise forming on her arm where she'd hit the wall. She saw a flicker of something in his expression. It wasn't pity. It was harder, like recognition. Then it was gone. He turned and left, closing the door behind him with a heavy, final click. She did not sleep. She locked the door. A useless, laughable gesture. A man who lived in a place like this did not care about a locked door. She stood under the spray of the shower, a shower head the size of a dinner plate, and scrubbed at her skin until it was red, trying to wash off the diner, the alley, the fear. She found the clothes in the closet, Soft, gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt. They were new, the tags removed, and impossibly soft. They felt like a costume. She lay on top of the massive bed, staring at the ceiling. Every sound made her jump. The hum of the air conditioning, the whisper of the elevator in the distance. She was haunted. The images played behind her closed eyelids, the glint of metal in the alley, the man's face as he turned, the blank, dismissive look from the police officers, the negative balance on the ATM screen. She was trapped. She had traded one terror for another, and she was not foolish enough to believe this one was safer. It was just cleaner. In his office, 2 floors above, Vincent Romano watched a bank of black and white screens. He watched the camera feed aimed at the hallway outside her room. He saw the sliver of light under the door, the only sign she was even there. He poured another 2 fingers of whiskey into a heavy crystal glass. He had not lied. He was not one of them. He was not a serpenti butcher, leaving messes in alleys for waitresses to find. He was a surgeon. He was a king. And kings had rules. But watching her, so small and defiant, huddled in the pantry of that greasy spoon, she had reminded him of someone he had lost, someone else who had been too proud to be scared, right up until the end. He had failed to protect Alara. He had been too young, too weak. He was not weak anymore. He watched the light under Ava's door. He was protective, yes, but from a distance. He could not let himself get close. This girl was a problem, a loose end that was now tangled up with him. He would keep her safe, let the Serpenti bleed themselves dry in their war with the Falcones, and then he would let her go. He drank the whiskey. It burned, but it didn't numb the memory. It never did. Ava must have dozed, because she woke with a gasp to bright, painful daylight. The room had no curtains, just electronic shades that were, apparently, on a timer. They had retracted, revealing the city in the harsh light of morning. She was starving, and her head ached. She crept out of the room, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. The penthouse was empty. The silence was absolute. It was like being on the moon. She found the kitchen. It was larger than the entire diner, a gleaming landscape of stainless steel and black granite. In the center of the vast living area, a television, one that was easily 80 inches wide, was on, the sound muted. It was tuned to a local news station. Curiosity, stronger than her fear, made her pick up the remote. She unmuted it. Escalating turf war between 2 of the city's most notorious syndicates. Police are bracing for further violence following a series of conflicts between the Serpenti crew and the rival Falcone organization. Ava's blood went cold. She sat on the edge of a leather sofa that probably cost $10,000. While police have not officially linked last night's reported, the report continued, but she had heard enough. Serpenti. The name sounded like a snake, and it sent a chill of recognition through her. This wasn't just a random murder. This was a war, and she had seen the first shot fired. She was not a witness. She was a liability, and she was sitting in the house of a man who was clearly, terrifyingly, a part of that same world. She had to leave. She couldn't be here. She was bringing this danger, this war, to his doorstep. She didn't know who he was. Not really, but she knew he was not a good man, and yet he had saved her. She would not repay that by getting him killed. She ran back to the room. Her diner uniform, filthy and smelling of grease and fear, was in a heap on the bathroom floor. She looked at her worn-out sneakers. It was all she had. She grabbed them and ran for the elevator, the one that had brought her up. She stabbed the down button. Nothing. It didn't light up. She tried again. "It won't come for you." She spun around. Vincent was standing at the far end of the hall. He was in a fresh suit, the same black as before. He looked like he had slept for a week. "You can't keep me here," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "I'm not your prisoner." "No," he agreed, walking toward her, his footsteps echoing on the marble. "You're a target, and as long as you are in this building, you are my target." "I saw the news," she said, backing away until she hit the wall. "The Serpenti. The Falcones. This is a war, and I'm in the middle of it. I need to go. I'm putting you in danger." He laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was short, cold, and utterly humorless. "You? Put me in danger? That's optimistic." He was in front of her now, close enough that she had to crane her neck to look up at him. "Let's be clear. You are not a guest. You are not a concern. You are a problem I am managing." "Then let me go," she cried, pushing at his chest. It was like pushing against a brick wall. "I don't want your help. I'll take my chances. I can disappear." His hand shot out and gripped her wrist. It wasn't violent, but it was an iron-clad grip. He pulled her hand away from his chest and held it. "Where will you go?" His voice was suddenly quiet, sharp and deadly. "Back to the diner? They know you work there. Back to your apartment. They've been watching it all night. To your bank. Oh, wait." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You can't. Your ex-boyfriend, Derek, was very stupid with your name. Your account is not just frozen, it's seized. You have nothing. You are nothing out there. You are a ghost with a bounty on her head." Her defiance crumbled. The truth of his words hit her harder than any blow. How did you know that?" "I told you," he said, his eyes cold as the steel around them. "I know everything." He let go of her wrist, and she slumped against the wall, defeated. "You're not leaving," he said. It was a final judgment. "You are going to stay in this apartment. You will eat the food that is brought here. You will not try to use the phones or the elevator. And you will wait until I tell you it's safe. Do you understand me?" She looked at the floor, her hair falling around her face. She hated him. She hated his coldness, his control. But most of all, she hated that he was right. She nodded, a single, jerky motion. "Good." He turned and walked away. "I have business. Don't leave the room." That night, she found him in the kitchen. She hadn't been able to stay in the room. The long day had been a torment of silence and caged animal pacing. She'd explored the penthouse, finding rooms that were as empty and soulless as the first. It was a mausoleum. She couldn't sleep. The hunger was gone. Someone had, at some point, left a tray of food outside her door, but the thirst was real. And the loneliness. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the vast, glittering expanse of the city lights through the window. He was a silhouette, sitting on a stool at the black granite island. A bottle of amber liquid and a single glass were in front of him. He didn't turn. He knew she was there. "You should be sleeping," he said. His voice was different, thicker, tired. "I can't." She walked, her bare feet silent on the floor, and stopped on the other side of the island. I can't sleep." He took a drink, his throat moving. He didn't offer her one. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant, abstract sound of the city, 20 stories below. She broke it. "Why? Why me? You don't even know me. You said I was a problem. Why save me?" He stared into his glass. "I don't need a reason to do what I want." "That's not an answer," she said, her voice small. He looked up. His eyes, in the dim light, were not cold. They were empty. "You're right," he said. "It's not." He poured another drink, his hand steady. "This city, it's a machine. It chews people up. The poor, the unlucky, the ones who were in the wrong alley at the wrong time." He took a long, slow drink. "I was like you. Once. Alone. Scared. Nowhere to go." Ava was stunned into silence. This was not the man from this morning. This was someone else. What happened?" she whispered. He shook his head. "What always happens. You either get eaten, or you become the thing that eats." He looked at her. "You think I'm like them, don't you? The men in the alley." "Aren't you?" The words were out before she could stop them. A dangerous stillness came over him. He set the glass down with a heavy, precise clink. "No." He stood up. He was so tall. He walked around the island, and she flinched, backing up until she hit the counter. He stopped, a few feet away. "The Serpenti are animals," he said, his voice a low growl. "They kill for sport. They kill because they're sloppy. They kill women. They kill children." He took a step closer. "I do not kill women. I do not kill innocents. That is my code." "Then what do you do?" she asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Who do you kill?" I protect those the world forgets, he said, his gaze intense. I protect the ones, like you, who have no one else to turn to. And I remove the monsters who prey on them. The confession hung in the air between them. It was the rawest, most honest thing she had ever heard. The emotional tension in the room was so thick it was hard to breathe. He wasn't a good man. He was a killer, but he was her killer. She was so tired, and he was so close. She could smell the whiskey on his breath, sharp and warm. He looked at her, and his gaze was no longer assessing. It was something else. It was dark, and it was hungry. You remind me of someone, he whispered. His voice was rough. Who? Someone I lost. Someone I couldn't protect. He lifted his hand. It was slow. She watched it, mesmerized. She should have run. She should have moved. She did not. His fingers, calloused and warm, brushed a strand of hair from her face. His thumb grazed the skin of her cheek. Ava shivered. A full-body tremor that started in her toes and ended in her scalp. His eyes dropped to her mouth. He leaned in. It was a question. A dark, dangerous question. She didn't pull away. Her breath hitched. Her eyes fluttered closed. The kiss was slow. It was not gentle. It was deep, and it was filled with the tension of the last 2 days. It was a claim. It was the taste of expensive whiskey and a profound, aching loneliness. He wasn't asking. He was taking her fear, her exhaustion, her defiance, and giving her this. His other hand came up, not to her jaw, but to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her steady. Her hands, with a mind of their own, came up and gripped the front of his shirt. She wasn't pushing him away. She was holding on. It was the first solid thing she had touched in days. He deepened the kiss, his mouth moving against hers, and a small, broken sound escaped her throat. It was a sound of surrender. He pulled back, but only an inch. Their foreheads rested together. They were both breathing hard, the air hot between them. He said nothing. He just looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. He took her hand. His grip was warm, solid. He led her out of the kitchen, through the dark, silent penthouse. He did not lead her to the guest room. He led her to his. It was massive, dark, and dominated by a bed that looked big enough to hold an army. The only light came from the city, which wrapped around them on 2 sides. He pulled back the covers. They were dark gray, silk, and cool to the touch. He didn't get in. He just looked at her, waiting. It was not a command. It was the answer to her fear. Ava climbed into the bed. The sheets were cool and smelled like him, like soap and whiskey, and something metallic and clean. She curled on her side, facing him, a small island in an ocean of mattress. He watched her for a long moment. Then he walked to a chair in the corner and sat down, a sentinel in the dark, watching over his new, strange prize. She slept. For the first time, she slept. And it was not because he commanded it. It was because, in this cold, sterile palace, in the bed of a man who killed for a living, she felt, for the first time in her life, completely safe. The first thing she registered was the smell. Sandalwood, expensive soap, and the faint, masculine trace of whiskey and iron. It was him. The scent was woven into the pillowcase, into the impossibly soft, high thread count sheets that were tangled around her legs. Ava opened her eyes. The bed was empty. The sheets on his side were cold. She sat up, a wave of disorientation washing over her. She was in his bed. She had slept, a deep, heavy, dreamless sleep, in the bed of Vincent Romano, and he was gone. A quick glance confirmed it. The massive, dark-fumed room was empty. His suit from yesterday was gone, replaced by nothing. The chair he had sat in was empty. He had left early, for business. The word was a cold splash of water, reminding her exactly where she was and what he was. She slipped out of the bed, the silk sheets whispering against her skin. The black t-shirt and gray sweatpants he'd given her were on the floor where she'd left them before her shower. She pulled them on, the soft cotton a poor defense against the chill of the apartment. She felt like a ghost in his room. It was painfully, obsessively neat. A row of watches lay in a glass case on a dresser, a stack of books, all hardcovers with serious titles. Sat on the nightstand, there was no clutter, no personal photos, no life, just things. She left the room, her bare feet padding on the cold marble. The penthouse was brighter today, the morning sun streaming through the wall of glass, but it only made the place feel colder. It illuminated the dust-free surfaces, the sharp angles of the furniture, the complete lack of warmth. She was exploring, she told herself, just seeing the lay of the cage. And it was a cage. The elevator still didn't respond to her touch, but something new had been added. Standing near the elevator bank was a man. He was built like a refrigerator, dressed in a sharp black suit, and had an earpiece plugged into one ear. He wasn't looking at her, but his body was angled toward her, a silent, human barrier. She turned and walked toward the kitchen. She saw another one, standing near the hallway that led to the service entrance. Her heart began to pick up its pace. This was new. Yesterday, the penthouse had been empty, a silent tomb. Today, it was guarded. She felt a prickle of real, tangible fear. This was not for her protection, not entirely. This was to keep people out, the men from the alley, the Serpenti. She realized, with a sudden, sick lurch, that they were actively hunting her. The city glittering below was not a beautiful view. It was a hunting ground, and she was the prey. Vincent wasn't just hiding her. He was bracing for an attack. She was near the office where Vincent had been the day before. The door was slightly ajar. She heard voices, low, male, and tense. "It's a mistake. Boss, a liability." Ava froze. She pressed herself against the wall, her breath held tight in her chest. The girl isn't worth a war. You know what the Serpenti are. They don't follow rules. They're animals. They will see this as a provocation. The voice was rough, accented, not Vincent, then his voice. Cold, smooth, and laced with absolute authority. "She is not a liability. Leo, she is under my protection. That is all. But Vincent, the Falcones are already using this. They say you're weak, hiding a civilian, this turf war, bringing her here. It's a complication we don't need. Let her go. We can give her money, send her away, let the Serpenti think she just ran." There was a heavy silence. Ava could hear her own blood roaring in her ears. "Double the security on this building," Vincent said, his voice flat and final. "Put 2 men on the roof. I want eyes on every street, every car that stops for more than a minute. No one gets in. No one. Is that understood, boss? Is that understood, Leo?" A sigh. Defeat. "Understood." Ava ran. She didn't make a sound. She fled back to the guest room, her room, the one that felt slightly less like his, and locked the door. She was a complication, a liability. She was the spark that was going to start a war. She was trapped, and her presence was putting the only man who had helped her in danger. She paced the room, her hands clenched. She had to do something. She couldn't just sit here and wait. But what? She'd no money, no phone, no power. She started opening drawers. She didn't know what she was looking for. A key? A hidden phone? Anything. The drawers were empty. All of them. Just the smell of wood and polish. She moved to the nightstand, a heavy block of dark wood. She pulled the top drawer. It was stuck. She pulled harder, and it slid open with a heavy, oiled shush. It was not empty. A gun. It was black, heavy, and nestled in a custom-fit velvet lining. It wasn't like a gun she'd seen in movies. It was brutally real. It was an object of pure, cold purpose. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. Her fingers grazed the metal. It was cold, colder than the marble, colder than the air, colder than Vincent's eyes. She picked it up. It was heavy, shockingly heavy. Her whole arm dipped with the weight. This was his world. This was the answer to problems. This was what had been used in the alley. This was what they would use on her. Her stomach turned. A wave of nausea made her grip the edge of the nightstand. She, Ava, who cried when her boss yelled at her, was holding a tool designed for one reason, to end a life. She couldn't She slammed the gun back into the drawer, her hand recoiling as if she'd been burned. She pushed the drawer shut, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was not a killer. She was not a part of this. She was a waitress, and she was going to die. She was huddled on the bed, staring at the closed drawer. When the door to the room opened, she hadn't heard him. He moved like a shadow. Vincent stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, his jacket off. He was just in his black shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes. "You heard," he said. It wasn't a question. She looked up at him, her fear and self-loathing bubbling over into a sudden, sharp anger. "Why?" she whispered, her voice raw. He just watched her, his face an unreadable mask. "Why?" she demanded, standing up. She was trembling again, but this time with rage. "I heard your man. I'm a liability. I'm going to start a war. They are hunting me, and you. You're just keeping me here. Why?" She stalked toward him, stopping a few feet away. She was so small compared to him, a fact that only fueled her frustration. "I am nothing," she spat, her voice cracking. "I'm a waitress from a diner that smells like bleach. I have no money, no family, no one. I am not worth a war. So why save someone like me?" She was expecting him to yell, to be cold, to tell her to be quiet. He was silent for a long, heavy beat. He looked at her, and she felt like he was seeing straight through her skin, past the anger, to the terrified girl huddled in the pantry. "Because no one else will," he said. His voice was quiet. It held no anger, no defense. It was just the truth. A simple, devastating statement that cut through her rage and left her exposed. It wasn't about her. It was about him. It was about his code. It was about the girl he'd lost, the one he couldn't protect. He was saving her to save himself. The air vibrated with the unspoken confession. All the fight went out of her, replaced by a deep, aching emptiness. "I need to shower," she said, the words dull. She brushed past him, her shoulder hitting his arm. He didn't move. The water was scalding hot, but she barely felt it. She scrubbed her skin, trying to wash off the phantom weight of the gun. She tried to wash off the smell of his room, the feeling of his cold, calculated protection. She scrubbed until her skin was pink, but she still felt dirty. She still felt trapped. She turned off the water and stood in the steam, her breath fogging the glass. She was so tired of being afraid. She grabbed the nearest towel, a thick, white, impossibly plush rectangle, and wrapped it around her body, tucking it securely above her chest. When she opened the bathroom door, the steam billowing out into the bedroom, he was there. He was waiting. He hadn't moved from the doorway, just leaned against the frame, his arms crossed, waiting for her, their eyes locked. The air, already thick with steam, became charged with something else. The confrontation, his confession, her desperation, it all coalesced into a single, unbearable point of tension. He pushed off the wall and took a step toward her. She didn't move. She couldn't. He stopped in front of her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He lifted a hand, as if to touch her face, but let it fall. "Ava," he said. And her name on his lips was a prayer and a curse. That was all it took. The restraint snapped. His hands were on her, one on her waist, pulling her flush against him, the other burying itself in her damp hair, tilting her head back. His mouth crashed down on hers. It was not the slow, questioning kiss from the kitchen. This was a storm. It was raw, hungry, and desperate. It was all the things they hadn't said. It was his frustration, his exhaustion, and his dangerous, protective rage. It was her fear, her anger, and her desperate, terrifying flicker of hope. She gasped against his mouth, and he took the sound as his own. He backed her up, his steps sure, hers fumbling, until her bare back hit the cold wall. She winced, and he immediately gentled, his mouth softening, his hand in her hair loosening its grip, but he didn't pull away. He kissed her like he was starving. He kissed her like he was drowning, and she was his only air. Her hands came up to his chest, meaning to push him away, to give her room to breathe. But the moment her palms met the solid, warm muscle beneath his shirt, her fingers clenched. She gripped the fabric, pulling him closer. His mouth left hers, trailing a hot, open-mouthed path down her jaw to her neck. He found the pulse fluttering at the base of her throat, and his lips lingered. A low, broken sound escaped her. "Vincent," she whispered. It was a plea. That sound seemed to break him. He groaned, his mouth finding hers again. He pressed himself against her, his body hard and demanding. Her towel, already damp and loosened from their struggle, slipped. The top edge fell, and the terry cloth gaped open. He didn't notice, or he didn't care. His hands were on her back, under the towel, his palms hot against her bare skin. She arched into him, a shiver running through her. His shirt was in the way. She fumbled with the buttons, her fingers clumsy and shaking. She ripped one open, then another. He helped, his own hands tearing at his shirt, pulling it from his pants. This was it. This was the payment. The thought was a cold spike of ice in her gut, and just as she thought it, he stopped. He just froze. His whole body went rigid. His hands, which had been on her back, were now on her waist, gripping her so tightly his knuckles were white, but he wasn't pulling her closer. He was holding her away. He pulled his head back, his forehead resting against hers. His eyes were screwed shut. His breath was coming in ragged, painful gasps. He was shaking. The most powerful, dangerous man she had ever met. And he was shaking. "Vincent," she whispered, her own fear forgotten, replaced by a sudden, sharp confusion. He opened his eyes. They were dark, tortured, and afraid. "You're not a payment," he growled, his voice a guttural wreck. "You're not a distraction." He pulled back enough to look her in the eyes, his hands still gripping her waist. The towel had slipped, pooling around her hips, and she stood half naked before him. He didn't look. His eyes were locked on hers. "I need to know," he said, his voice cracking. "I need to know it's real." He was asking her. He wasn't demanding, he wasn't taking. He was asking. He was giving her the one thing no one else had, the choice. Her anger, her fear. It all dissolved. She saw him, not the mafia boss, not the killer, just a man who was just as broken and lonely as she was. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Slowly, she raised a trembling hand. She laid it against his cheek. His skin was rough with stubble and hot. He flinched, then leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for a brief second. She rose up on her toes, and she kissed him. It was a slow kiss. It was a deliberate kiss. It was her answer. It was yes. It was "I'm here." It was "I'm real, and so are you." A sound, something between a sob and a groan, tore from his throat. He lifted her. She was so light. He scooped her up in his arms, the ruined towel falling to the floor, forgotten. He carried her out of the bathroom, his mouth never leaving hers. He didn't toss her onto the bed. He laid her down. His movements reverent. The cool silk sheets were a shock against her hot skin. He followed her down, his body covering hers, his weight a comforting, solid pressure. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers in the dim light. "Ava," he whispered. "I'm here," she whispered back. It was not a storm this time. It was a slow, deliberate unwinding. His hands, which had been so rough, were now impossibly gentle. They explored her, tracing the line of her ribs, the curve of her hip. Her hands found the scar on his shoulder. A raised, jagged line. She traced it. He didn't flinch. Limbs tangled. The cool silk of the sheets. The hot, smooth skin of his back. He buried his face in her neck, and his whispered words were not commands. They were confessions. Her name, over and over. She held him, her fingers gripping his shoulders, her body arching to meet his. It was a collision of two lonely, broken souls. It was not about payment. It was not about power. It was about finding a single, solid point of solace in a world that was trying to kill them. It was breath-catching, and moans muffled against shoulders, and the simple, undeniable, heart-stopping reality of touch. It was real. The next morning, Ava woke to sunlight. She was warm. She was wrapped in his arms, her back pressed against his chest. His breathing was deep and even, tickling her hair. His arm was draped heavily over her waist, holding her. For one single, solitary second, she felt safe. A crack. The sound was sharp, Unnatural and loud, it echoed through the penthouse, a violent punctuation to the morning, a gunshot. Vincent was out of the bed before she had time to scream. He moved in a single, fluid motion, grabbing the gun from the nightstand drawer, his gun, and was on his feet, pulling her down, shielding her with his own body, all in the space of a heartbeat. "Stay down," he snarled. "Don't move." Someone had tried to breach the penthouse. The gunshot was followed by a muffled shout, then 2 more shots. Rapid fire. From somewhere outside the apartment. They sounded farther away. Not in the room, not even in the hallway, but perhaps by the elevator banks. Vincent did not move. He remained a human shield over Ava, the gun held steady in his hand, pointed at the bedroom door. He was absolutely still, his entire body coiled and listening. The silence that fell after the shots was heavier and more terrifying than the noise. Ava's heart was a drum against her ribs. She was naked, tangled in the silk sheets, with Vincent's warm, bare back pressed against her. The contrast between the intimacy of the night and the cold terror of the morning was a physical shock. "Vincent," she whispered, her voice a dry croak. "Shh." His voice was a low growl, vibrating through his chest into her. "Stay down." He waited. 1 minute. 2. The silence stretched, thick and absolute. Then his phone, which had been on the nightstand, buzzed. Not a ring, just a single, hard vibration. He reached for it, his eyes never leaving the door. He flipped it open and put it to his ear. "What?" He listened. Ava watched the muscles in his jaw clench. "1," he said. "Alive?" A pause. "Good, bring him to the warehouse. I'll be there in 20. He snapped the phone shut and finally moved off her. He stood, his body a map of lean muscle and tense energy, and for a second, he seemed to forget the gun was in his hand. He looked at her, huddled in the sheets, her eyes wide with terror. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were black with a rage that wasn't directed at her. "Get dressed," he said, his voice flat. He turned and stalked out of the room, still naked, the gun held at his side. By the time she fumbled her way back into the gray sweatpants and black t-shirt, he was back. He was dressed in a fresh black suit, his hair still damp from a shower she hadn't even heard him take. He looked, once again, like the cold, untouchable king of this sterile palace. "Leo is outside the door," he said, his voice all business. "He'll stay with you. Do not open the door for anyone else. Do not leave this apartment." "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. Was that for me?" He stopped buttoning his cuff. "They found you. One of the Serpenty's hired guns. He got past the lobby security. My men on the floor stopped him." "Stopped him?" she whispered. "Is he dead?" "No." Vincent's smile was a cold, terrifying thing. "He's unlucky. He's alive." He finished the button and looked at her. "He won't be for long." He was going to question him, to torture him. She knew it as surely as she knew her own name. The man who had been so tender last night, who had shaken in her arms, was gone. This was the Mafia boss. "I have to go," he said. "Vincent, wait." She ran to him, grabbing the sleeve of his expensive suit. "Don't, please. This is my fault. Let me just go. I'll run. I'll disappear. They won't find me, and they won't come after you anymore. Please, let me go." He looked down at her hand on his arm, slowly, deliberately. He covered her hand with his own. His grip was warm and strong. "It is too late for that," he said, his voice quiet. "But your man, Leo, he was right," she sobbed, the tears she'd been holding back finally breaking free. "I'm a liability. I'm a burden. I'm going to get you killed. I'm going to start a war. This war started long before you, Ava." He pulled her hand from his sleeve and held it, lacing his fingers with hers. He looked at her, and the coldness in his eyes was replaced by that same dark intensity from the night before. "You are not a burden," he said, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You are not a liability." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, possessive growl that shivered down her spine. "You're mine now." He released her hand, turned, and walked out the door, leaving her alone in the silence, his words hanging in the air. You're mine now." It wasn't a promise. It was a judgment. He was gone for 12 hours. 12 hours Ava spent pacing the penthouse, a prisoner watched over by the silent, stone-faced Leo, who stood outside her door like a statue. She couldn't eat. She couldn't read. She could only think. She thought about the gunshot. She thought about the man who was unlucky enough to be alive. And she thought about Vincent's hands on her, first in tenderness, then in possession. When he returned, it was well after midnight. She had fallen asleep on the sofa, and the sound of the elevator door opening jerked her awake. He walked into the living room, and she knew, instantly, that something was broken. He was still in his suit, but it was rumpled, his tie was gone, and there was a dark, ugly smear on his shirt. Blood. Vincent, he didn't look at her. He walked past her, to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and stared out at the city. "You were right," he said. His voice was dead. Flat. "What?" "The attacker. He didn't get past security." He turned, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. "He was let in, by one of my own men." Ava's hand flew to her mouth. "A betrayal? A mole?" "He's been with me for 10 years, Vincent said, his voice a low rasp. 10 years. He sold us out. He sold you out for money, for the Serpenti." He slammed his fist against the glass. The sound was sharp. A dull thud that echoed in the silent room. Ava didn't even flinch. "He's gone," Vincent said. "The man who shot at you, the mole, they're both gone." She knew what gone meant. "We're not safe here," she whispered. "No." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound weariness. "They know about the penthouse. They know about my security. They knew exactly when and where to hit." He looked at her, his eyes finally focusing on her. "Pack your things." "I don't have any things, Vincent." He nodded, as if just remembering. "Right." He walked to a closet by the door, punched in a code, and pulled out a simple black duffel bag. "Then we go." They left the penthouse in a way she never had before, through a service elevator, down to a subterranean garage she didn't know existed. The car was different, not the sleek black sedan, but a heavy, dark green truck that looked like it could drive through a building. They drove for hours, out of the city, away from the lights, onto dark, winding highways. Vincent was silent, his profile rigid in the faint green light of the dashboard. Ava stayed silent, too. She was his. He had said it, and right now, his meant being driven into the middle of nowhere by a killer with blood on his shirt. Finally. He turned off the highway, onto a gravel road, and then onto a dirt path so narrow that branches scraped against the windows. They were in a forest, deep, dark, and silent. The house was a shadow against the trees. It was not a mansion. It was a cabin, built of dark wood and stone, with a single sloping roof. It was secluded. It was quiet. It looked safe. Inside, it was the opposite of the penthouse. It was warm. It was filled with worn leather furniture, thick rugs, and a massive unlit stone fireplace. It smelled of pine and wood smoke. "Where is this?" Ava asked, her voice hushed in the quiet. "A place," he said, dropping the duffel bag by the door. "No one knows about it. Not Leo. Not the man who... Not anyone. I've never brought anyone here." She turned to him. "Never? Never." His gaze was heavy. He had brought her, the liability, to the one place he kept for himself. The vulnerability of that admission, coming from a man like him, was more staggering than any confession. He built a fire. He moved with an efficient grace, stacking the logs, adding the kindling. He didn't use a lighter. He struck a match. The small, sulphurous scrape echoing in the room. The fire caught, and a warm orange glow began to push back the shadows. He sat on the hearth, staring into the flames, the blood on his shirt a dark accusation in the firelight. "Go shower," he said, not looking at her. "There are clothes in the upstairs closet." "Vincent," she said softly. "Just go. Ava, please." She went. The bathroom was simple, clean and stocked with the same expensive soap he used. The clothes in the closet were his, soft, worn t-shirts and flannel. She pulled on a dark blue shirt, and it hung to her knees like a dress. the sleeves covering her hands. It smelled like him, like soap and sandalwood and the faint, metallic tang of his anger. When she came back downstairs, he was gone, and so was the bloody shirt. He returned a minute later from a back room, wearing a simple gray Henley. The fire was roaring now, and the room was warm. She sat on the thick rug in front of the fireplace, pulling her knees to her chest. He sat on the worn leather sofa, a few feet away, a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses on the low wooden table between them. He poured a small amount for her and a larger one for himself. He gave her the glass. Their fingers brushed. The small, simple touch was electric. They drank in silence for a long time, the only sound the crackle of the logs. "I'm sorry," she whispered, staring into the flames. "This is not your fault, Ava." "It is. If I hadn't been in that alley..." "They would have found another reason," he said, his voice rough. "This has been coming for a long time." He took a long drink. This is a job. It's business. You are not..." She looked at him. "What am I..." "Vincent." He stared into his glass. "I don't know." She turned back to the fire. The silence was comfortable, easy. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath her skin, but here, in this warm, hidden place, it was muffled. She started to hum, a low, sad tune she didn't even realize she knew. It was a song her mother used to sing, a simple, old-world lullaby. Vincent went still. He didn't speak. He just watched. She felt his gaze, but she didn't stop. The tune turned into words, her voice soft and a little rusty, but clear in the quiet room. She sang about a lost bird and a safe nest, a simple, childish song. When she finished, she felt foolish. She looked at him, a blush rising on her cheeks. "It's silly. My mom used to sing it." He was watching her like she was something holy, like he was a starving man and she was a feast. His eyes were dark, not with anger, but with an emotion so deep, so raw, it stole her breath. "Don't stop," he whispered. She didn't sing again. She just looked at him, and the space between them shrank. The air grew thick, charged with all the things they couldn't say. He set his glass down. He reached out, his hand hovering over her face. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice rough. He moved from the sofa to the floor, kneeling in front of her. He was so close. The firelight played over the hard planes of his face. "Ava," he said, and it was a question. She gave him the same answer she had given him in the penthouse. She leaned in and kissed him. This kiss was different. It wasn't the desperate hunger of the penthouse. It wasn't the possessive claim. This was slow. This was tender. This was sad. He kissed her like he was memorizing her. His lips were soft, moving over hers with a reverence that made her heart ache. His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. She leaned into his touch, her hands finding his chest. This was what she had been afraid of. Not the violence, not the guns. This terrifying, heartbreaking vulnerability. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers. I don't know how to do this," he whispered. Gentle. I'm not a good man, Ava." "I know," she whispered back. "I'm not asking you to be." He began to unbutton the flannel shirt she was wearing. His fingers were not clumsy, but they were slow, deliberate. He undressed her with a reverence that made her feel cherished. He peeled the shirt from her shoulders, his gaze following the movement, his eyes dark with a mixture of desire and a profound, aching pain. The shirt fell away, and she was bare in the firelight. He just looked at her. He didn't grab, he didn't take. His hand came up, and his fingers traced the line of her collarbone. She shivered. "You're cold," he said. "No," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm not." She reached for him. Her hands found the hem of his Henley. He let her pull it up, his muscles flexing under her touch. She pulled it over his head, and he was bare, too, in the firelight. She saw it clearly. The scar she had touched in the dark. It was a jagged, puckered line on his left shoulder, near his heart. It was an old wound, but it was ugly. Her fingers went to it, lightly tracing the raised skin. He flinched. A hard, sharp intake of breath, his whole body tensing as if expecting a blow. She pulled her hand back. "I'm sorry." "No," he said, his voice tight. He grabbed her hand and pressed it back to the scar. He held it there, forcing her to feel it, his eyes screwed shut. It's okay. No one's ever..." He let her. He let her touch his weakest, most damaged place. Her heart broke for him. For this killer, this monster, this man. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to the scar. A sound tore from his throat, a raw, wounded sound. He pulled her to him, his mouth finding hers, and it was no longer tender. It was urgent. It was desperate. It was two broken souls finding solace in the dark. He laid her back on the thick rug, the wool soft against her skin. He made love to her. It was slow and deep, a rhythm of connection. There were no games, there was no power. There was just this, her and him, tender, urgent, two halves of a jagged whole, fitting together in the warm, flickering light of the fire. Afterward, she didn't want to move. He held her, his arms wrapped around her, his heart beating a steady, strong rhythm against her ear. She was boneless, safe, and for the first time in her life, she felt home. She fell asleep on his chest, the sound of the fire and his breathing lulling her into a deep, dreamless peace. Vincent did not sleep. He held her, her small, warm body curled against his. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in her scent, smoke and soap, and something that was just her. He'd killed a man today. Two, if he was honest. He had watched the man who had betrayed him, and he had felt nothing. Just cold, empty satisfaction. And now, holding her, he felt everything. He felt the ragged edges of his own soul. He felt the weight of the scar she had kissed. He felt a terrifying, white-hot protective rage that had nothing to do with codes or business, and everything to do with the woman sleeping in his arms. He had told her she was his. He had meant it as a statement of protection, a fact. But now, staring into the dying embers of the fire, he knew it was more than that. He was willing to kill for her. He had already done it. He was willing to start a war for her. He realized, with a cold, terrifying certainty, that he was willing to die for her. Miles away, in a dimly lit, cigar-smoke-filled room, the Serpenti boss, a man named Rico, slammed his phone down. "He's dead," Rico spat. The mole, the assassin, both dead. Romano's new pet. She's still alive. He looked at the men around his table. This waitress has made a fool of me. Romano wants a war? He gets one. He picked up a photo, a grainy ATM security shot of Ava. "I want her head," he said, his voice low and vicious. "Put a price on it, $500,000. I want every lowlife, every hired gun in this city looking for her. And I want the location of that safe house." One of his men, sitting in the shadows, looked at his phone, a new, unread message. "Boss," the man said, "I think I've got it." The first sound was not a gunshot. It was a whine, a high, thin, unnatural sound, like a mechanical insect, and it was close. Ava was warm, cocooned in Vincent's arms, the memory of their lovemaking in the firelight a warm, hazy shield against the world. The fire was just glowing embers, and the first gray light of dawn was filtering through the curtains. She was safe. The whine came again. Vincent was moving before she was even fully awake. He didn't sit up. He rolled, a fluid, silent motion that put him on his feet, his gun from the nightstand already in his hand. He was naked, a silhouette of coiled muscle, an absolute menace in the dim light. What is that?" Ava whispered, pulling the flannel shirt up to her neck. He didn't answer. He moved to the window, his bare feet silent on the wooden floor. He edged the curtain back a millimeter. His body went rigid. "Get dressed," he said. His voice was not the one that had whispered her name hours ago. It was the voice of the Mafia boss, cold, flat, final. "Now." "Vincent, you're scaring me. What is it?" He let the curtain fall. "They found us." He threw her the sweatpants from the floor. As she scrambled to pull them on, her leg throbbing from the chase, he explained. his voice a low, furious growl. "Outside the window, a drone. It's got a camera. They're watching us right now." Her blood turned to ice. The mole. The one who leaked the penthouse. He must have put a tracker on the truck. Or on me. He was pulling on his own pants, his movements sharp, angry. "They know we're here. They know we're alone." A high-powered crack echoed through the forest, and the window above her head exploded, showering the room in glass. "Cellar!" Vincent roared. He grabbed her arm, yanking her toward the kitchen. "There's a trapdoor. You go. You hide. Do not come out." "No!" She yanked her arm back, her bare feet sliding on the floor. "I'm not leaving you. I'm not hiding in a hole. Ava, this is not a discussion." He was dragging her, his grip like a steel vise. "I am not a burden." She screamed back, the words tearing from her throat, a desperate echo of her greatest fear. "You said I was yours. I stay with you." He looked at her, his face a mask of primal fury. For a second, she thought he would hit her. Instead, he shoved her behind the heavy stone fireplace. "Fine," he snarled. "You're mine, so you will do exactly as I say. Stay here. Do not move. Do not make a sound." Gunfire erupted, not one gun, but a dozen. The small cabin, her one place of safety, was being torn apart. The sound of automatic weapons was deafening, a relentless, percussive thud, thud, thud as bullets ripped through the wooden walls. Splinters of wood and plaster filled the air. Ava huddled behind the stone, her hands over her ears, her eyes squeezed shut. Vincent was a shadow. He moved from the fireplace to the corner, using the one solid wall as cover. He fired twice. Not a panic spray, but two, deliberate, space shots. A scream from outside told her he'd hit his mark. The gunfire stopped, into the ringing silence, a new sound, a voice amplified by a bullhorn, tinny and cruel. "Romano, we know you're in there, and we know you've got our $500,000 prize." Ava's breath hitched. $500,000? That was the bounty on her head? "Send out the girl, Romano." The voice, which she now recognized as Rico's, boomed. "She's just a waitress. She's not worth this. Send her out and we might let you live. We might." Vincent was still, his body coiled. He was breathing, low and even, like a predator. He was counting. "You're a dead man, Romano. You and your—" The bullhorn was cut off by a new sound, the roar of a heavy truck engine, coming fast, not toward the house, but along the perimeter road. This was followed by a fresh, chaotic-sounding burst of gunfire, this time away from them. Vincent's head snapped up. His phone, on the table, buzzed. He dove for it, sliding across the floor, and flipped it open. A text. He read it, and his face changed. A flash of something. Shock. Grief. "Leo," he breathed. "What?" Ava whispered. "He must have followed me. As a shadow. He was watching." Vincent's voice was raw. "He just sent his truck, remote, into their flank, a diversion." As if on cue, a massive whump shook the entire cabin, rocking the foundation, a secondary explosion. Dirt and shrapnel rained down on the roof. "He just blew his truck," Vincent said, his voice hollow. "He just sacrificed himself. For us." The gunfire outside was now a chaotic mess. The attackers were confused, their attention split. "Now," Vincent said. He grabbed her. "The cellar. It's not a cellar. It's a tunnel. It leads to the woods. We have to go." He kicked aside the heavy bearskin rug in the kitchen, revealing a trap door. He yanked it open, revealing a dark, square hole and a rickety ladder. "Go, Ava, go!" She didn't argue. She scrambled down the ladder, her bare feet hitting the damp earth. The tunnel was low and smelled of mold and wet dirt. Vincent was right behind her, pulling the door shut over their heads. The world went black. The sounds of the siege were instantly muffled, distant. "I have a light," he said, his voice echoing. A click, and a powerful beam from a flashlight cut the darkness. He grabbed her hand. "This way. Run." They ran, stumbling, crouching, their hands brushing the cold, damp tunnel walls. Above them, they could hear the faint, muffled shouts, the pops of gunfire, and they could feel the vibration of the explosion. Leo. He had died for them. Ava sobbed as she ran, her lungs burning. "Don't cry for him yet," Vincent growled, pulling her. "We don't let it be for nothing." They reached the end, a wall of wooden planks. Vincent put his shoulder to it and shoved. The wall gave way, and they burst out of a curtain of overgrown ivy, collapsing onto a carpet of wet leaves. It was raining. A cold, miserable, pre-dawn downpour that plastered her flannel shirt to her skin in an instant. "The road is this way," Vincent said, pulling her to her feet. "There's a truck. There, over there, I see them." A shout from the woods, not 50 yards away. They hadn't just guarded the house. They'd guarded the escape route. A shot cracked through the rain. Ava screamed, a high, thin sound, and fell, her leg collapsing under her. "Ava!" Vincent spun, his face a mask of terror. "I'm okay," she gasped, trying to stand. I tripped. She looked down. A dark, wet stain was spreading on the thigh of her sweatpants. It wasn't just rain. "Oh," she said, her voice small. Another shot thwacked into the tree beside them, sending bark flying. Vincent didn't say a word. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't check the wound. He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing. His arm a steel band under her knees, the other around her back, and he ran. He ran through the dark, pouring rain. He was a force of nature, a primal, raging bull crashing through the undergrowth, shielding her with his own body. She clung to him, her face buried in his neck, her blood warm on his shirt. She could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic, furious rhythm. He was panting, his breath coming in hot clouds, but he did not slow. He ran with a rage that was so profound it was silent. It was a rage for Leo. It was a rage for the mole who had betrayed them. It was a rage for the serpentine who had dared to touch what was his. He reached a dark pickup truck, a different one, hidden in a deep, wooded ravine. He put her in the passenger seat, his movements fast but jarringly gentle. "It's just a graze," he said, his voice tight. He was already ripping open a first aid kit from under the seat. He tore her sweatpants, his hands clinical. "It went clean through. You're lucky." He wrapped a thick bandage around her thigh, pulling it tight. She cried out. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." He slammed the truck into gear and tore out of the ravine, the tires spitting mud. They drove for an hour, back toward the city, but to a part she didn't recognize. A gray, industrial wasteland of shuttered warehouses and chain-link fences. He pulled into a dark alley and stopped behind a defunct print shop. "Here?" she whispered. "Here," he said. The hideout was an apartment above the shop. It was ugly. It had a lumpy sofa, a small bed with a stained mattress, and a single, buzzing fluorescent light in the kitchen. But the door was steel, and the windows were barred. It was a box. He sat her on the bed. The adrenaline was fading, and she was starting to shiver, her teeth chattering from the cold and the shock. He found a thin, scratchy wool blanket and wrapped it around her. "I have to go," he said. He was at the small sink, washing his hands, scrubbing the mud and her blood from his skin. "No." He stopped, his back to her. "No," she said again, her voice stronger. She stood up, her bandaged leg shaking, but she held on to the bed frame. "You can't. Not again, Vincent, look at me." He turned, his face was pale, his eyes black holes of exhaustion and fury. "Leo is dead," she said, the tears starting again, hot and fast. "I'm shot. This is a war, and it's because of me. I know it." "This is not about you," he roared, slamming his wet hand on the counter. "It's all about me," she cried, hobbling toward him. "That man? Rico? He put a price on my head. This doesn't stop. I know that, so please, let's just go. You and me, we can run. We can leave this city. Leave this life. Please, Vincent, let's just go." He looked at her tear-stained face, her matted hair, the pathetic wool blanket clutched around her, his flannel shirt still visible underneath. His expression softened, just for a second, and the exhaustion in his eyes was so profound it broke her heart. He walked to her. He cupped her face in his large, warm hands. "I can't run. Ava," he said, his voice raw. "You heard him. They put a price on you. They know you're with me. They know. They know what you are to me. If we run, they will hunt us. For the rest of our lives, they will never, ever stop. Not until you're dead." "So what?" she sobbed, her body slumping against his. "At least we'd be together." "No." His voice was firm. He tilted her chin up. "You will live. You will open that cafe you talked about. You will smile. I promise you." He leaned his forehead against hers. "This ends. Tonight. One last time." "What? What are you going to do?" she whispered, terrified of the answer. "I am going to finish this," he said, "for us." The moment was a fragile, crystalline thing. The entire world, the war, the blood, the rain, all of it narrowed to this single point, to his hands on her face, his eyes on hers. She knew he was leaving. She knew he might not come back. Her own hands came up, trembling, and covered his. She held them there, her small fingers gripping his, and she pressed her face into his palms, inhaling his scent of rain and soap and iron. "Don't die," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, Vincent, don't you dare die." He was still. His gaze locked on hers. A long, agonizing second passed, a lifetime. "Then don't give me a reason to," he answered. He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was not passionate. It was a seal, a vow. It was the taste of her tears, and the salt of his skin, and the ironclad promise of his words. It was hard, and it was brief, and it was goodbye. He pulled away. "There are 3 deadbolts on that door. Lock them. Do not open it for anyone. Not for any reason. You'll know it's me. I'll knock 3 times. Fast, like this." He tapped his knuckles against the wall. Rap, rap, rap. "Do you understand?" She nodded, unable to speak. He kissed her forehead, and he was gone. The door clicked shut. She heard the thud of the first bolt, the shing of the second, the clack of the third. She was alone. Vincent moved through the city, a ghost fueled by rage and purpose. He used a burner phone. He made one call. "Rico, this is Romano." He let the exhaustion, the real exhaustion, bleed into his voice. This is too much. It's gone too far. Leo's dead. My girl is hurt. I'm done." A harsh laugh on the other end. So the great Romano finally breaks. "I want peace," Vincent said. "A truce. I'll give you whatever you want." "I want the girl," Rico growled. "No." The word was steel. "Not her. Never, but the docks, the Southside Territory. It's yours. I'm walking away. I just want to keep her safe." Silence. Rico was thinking. It was too easy. "A meeting," Vincent said, pushing. "Tonight. The old cannery on the water. Your territory. Just you, me, and 1 man each. We end this. We sign a treaty." "How do I know this isn't a trap?" "Because I'm coming to you," Vincent said, his voice laced with defeat. "I'm the one who's bleeding. What do I have to gain?" Rico agreed. An hour later, the cannery was a cathedral of rust and shadow. Rain poured through the holes in the roof. Rico was there, and he hadn't followed the rules. He had 3 men with him. Vincent walked in, alone. "Where's your man? Romano?" Rico smirked, his hand on his gun. "He's here," Vincent said. From the shadows behind Vincent, a man stepped out. He was short, heavy-set, and he was one of Rico's own lieutenants, a man named Sal. Rico's smirk vanished. "Sal, what the hell is this?" "This," Vincent said, his voice suddenly stripped of all weakness, "is the man who's been leaking my locations for 6 months, the one who told you about the penthouse, the one who put the tracker on my truck, the one who told you about my safe house." Sal's face was a sheet of white sweat. "Boss, Rico, he's lying." "It's a trick." "Is it?" Vincent said. "He told me you were planning to kill me tonight and take my territory anyway. He sold you out, Rico, just like he sold me out, man, for a bigger cut." Rico looked at Sal, his eyes filled with a new, venomous doubt. "You're a liar, Romano!" Sal screamed, his panic making him sloppy. He pulled his gun. He was too slow. Vincent's gun was already in his hand. A single, deafening bang echoed through the cannery. Sal collapsed, a hole in his chest. The building was silent. "That," Vincent said, his gun still smoking, "was for Leo." He holstered his weapon. "Now, about our truce." Rico was staring at the body. He was trapped. Vincent had exposed his traitor and proven his own strength. At that exact moment, across town, Ava was huddled on the lumpy bed, listening to the rain. She heard a sound at the door, not a knock, a scraping, a key. Her heart stopped. She backed away from the door, her hand flying to her mouth. A key slid into the lock. The deadbolts. The deadbolts were only on her side. The lock clicked, the door swung open. It wasn't a trap for Vincent, it was an ambush. The mole's information had been used for a two-pronged attack, and she was alone. The key turned. The sound was deafening in the small, silent apartment. Ava's blood went cold, and she scrambled backward off the bed, her injured leg buckling. She landed hard on the floor, her body screaming in protest, but adrenaline drowned the pain. The deadbolts, all three, were useless. They had been on her side. The door swung open, hitting the wall with a hollow thud. Two men filled the doorway. They were not Vincent. They were big, dressed in dark rain gear, and their faces were cruel, careless. They were serpenty. "Well, look what we got here," the first one said, his voice a low growl. He stepped into the room, his eyes raking over her, taking in her fear, her pathetic wool blanket, the blood-soaked bandage on her thigh. $500,000, and she's already bleeding for us. Saves us the trouble. "Get her," the second one said, impatient. Ava grabbed the only thing near her, a heavy glass table lamp. "Stay back," she screamed, her voice cracking. "He'll kill you. Vincent will kill you all." The first man laughed. "Vincent's busy," he said, stalking toward her. "He's busy signing his own death warrant." Ava swung the lamp. She was desperate, a cornered animal, fueled by a terror so profound it became its own kind of rage. She connected with the man's shoulder, and the lamp shattered. But he barely flinched. He grabbed her by the hair. Yanking her head back, she screamed, clawing at his face, her nails digging into his skin. She fought, she kicked, she bit. She screamed until her throat was raw. She was not the girl from the diner. She was not the girl who hid in the pantry. She was the woman who had slept in Vincent's arms. She was his. Damn. "She's a fighter," the second man grunted, grabbing her arms. "Put her out, Wayne," the first man snarled, wiping blood from a scratch on his cheek. She felt a sharp, brutal blow to the side of her head. The world didn't go black. It exploded into white, hot pain, and then a rushing, velvet darkness. The last thing she felt was the small, thin chain around her neck, a simple silver chain she'd worn since she was 16, snapping as the man yanked her from the floor. Then nothing. Vincent drove through the rain, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The truce was a lie. He knew it. Rico knew it. But the meeting had served its purpose. He had exposed the real mole. He had killed him. He had shown Rico, in his own territory, that he was still in control. He had planted a seed of doubt in Rico's organization and reestablished the old, cold order of fear. It was a temporary fix, but it would buy him time. Time to get Ava out. Time to disappear. He pulled into the alley behind the print shop. His blood ran cold. The steel door was open. It was ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. No. The word was a whisper. He was out of the car before it stopped, his gun in his hand. He didn't run. He moved, a shadow, his senses screaming. The apartment was a wreck. The lumpy sofa was overturned. The bed was stripped. His men, the two he had left guarding the alley, were slumped against the wall. Not dead. Beaten, zip-tied. A message. They were alive. Rico was sloppy, but he wasn't stupid. He wanted Vincent to know this was personal. This wasn't about business. It was about her. Vincent's eyes scanned the floor. Glass, from the broken lamp, a dark smear of blood on the carpet, hers, from her leg, and then he saw it. Gleaming in the grime, half hidden under the bed frame, was a thin, broken silver chain. He didn't touch it, he just stared at it. The air in his lungs turned to ice. He had seen her fiddle with it when she was nervous. He had felt it, cool against his skin. When she slept on his chest, the coldness in his chest ignited. It was not a slow burn. It was a nuclear flashpoint. The rage was so pure, so absolute. It was silent. It was a void. The man who had felt tortured, exhausted, who had longed for peace, was gone. The king had returned. He walked out of the apartment, past his groaning men. He used his phone. He made one call. "Leo is dead," he said, his voice a flat, dead calm. "They have Ava." The man on the other end, an old-timer named Matteo, who had served Vincent's father, was silent for a beat. "What do you need?" "Don Romano." It was the first time in 5 years anyone had used the formal title. "Everyone," Vincent said. "Everyone who still believes in the code. Everyone who is tired of animals like Rico running our city. I am not asking for a favor. Matteo, I am calling in every debt. I am claiming every marker. I am going to war, and I am burning his entire world to the ground. Tonight." They gathered at a disused shipyard, a skeletal maze of iron and steel. They were not just soldiers. They were ghosts. Old-timers pulled from retirement. Men who owed Vincent their lives, their families. They were the ones who knew his code. No women, no innocence. Rico had broken the code, and he had put a price on an innocent. He had taken her. Vincent stood on a platform, the rain pouring down on him. He was a general, an executioner, an avenging angel. There was no speech. There was no rally. He just looked at the 30 men who had come. "He has her," he said, his voice carrying in the storm. "He has her at the Serpenti compound. We get her back. We leave no one standing." The compound was a converted meat-packing plant, a brick-and-mortar fortress in the worst part of the city. It was a place of slaughter, and Vincent intended for it to live up to its name. He did not go in the front. He and 2 men used the old sewer tunnels, the ones his father had used to run whiskey 30 years ago. The assault was high stakes, violent and precise. Explosions rocked the North Gate, a diversion, led by Matteo, drawing the bulk of Rico's men. In the chaos, Vincent's team breached the sub-basement. The fighting was brutal. It was close quarters, dark and intimate. Vincent moved through it like a phantom, his gun an extension of his will. He didn't waste bullets. Every shot was a kill. He was fueled by one image, Ava's face, her blood on the floor, her broken chain. He was a hurricane of pure, focused rage. He found her on the 3rd floor, in Rico's office. Rico was there, standing over her, a gun to her head. "I knew you'd come, Romano. I knew you couldn't stay away." Ava was tied to a chair. She was bruised, her cheek a swollen, dark purple. Her hair was matted with dried blood, but she was alive. Her eyes were open, wide with terror. And when she saw him, the terror was eclipsed by one single, desperate hope. "Vincent," she breathed. It was the only word in the world. "Let her go." "Rico," Vincent said, his voice calm. He was standing in the doorway, his gun at his side. He looked relaxed. He looked bored. "This is between you and me." "It's always been about you." Rico screamed, his voice pitching high with panic and rage. He pressed the gun harder to Ava's temple. "But you see, I won. I have what you care about. Now drop the gun, or I'll blow her pretty, worthless head all over this room." Vincent didn't drop his gun. He just smiled, a cold, dead smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You lost the moment you touched her." "I'll do it, Vincent, I swear." A single shot rang out. Not from Vincent. Rico's eyes went wide. He looked down. A red, blossoming flower was growing on his chest. He looked behind him, at the man he'd left to guard the window. The man was one of Vincent's, one of Matteo's, Rico gurgled. He fell. It was not over. As Rico fell, the door behind Vincent burst open. 2 more of Rico's men, alerted by the shot. Vincent spun, firing, taking out the first one. The second man opened fire, a spray of automatic bullets that ripped through the wall. "Ava!" Vincent yelled, and he didn't run for cover. He ran for her. He threw his body in front of the chair, shielding her, his arms wrapping around her as the bullets tore into the room. He grunted, a sharp, pained sound, as a round slammed into his shoulder. The force spun him, and he felt a white-hot, searing pain. He stumbled, but he did not fall. He kept his body between her and the gunfire. "Vincent!" she screamed, her voice muffled against his chest. The gunman was reloading. Frantic, fumbling with the clip, they were cornered. Vincent was hit. His gun was empty, sliding from his numb fingers. He was bleeding, and the man was loading a fresh magazine. They were going to die. Ava, still tied to the chair, saw it all. She saw Vincent's blood, dark on his black shirt. She saw his gun on the floor, just out of reach, and she saw Rico's gun, which had clattered to the floor, not 3 feet from her. The fear was gone. The terror was gone. There was only rage. "Then don't give me a reason to," he had said, with a scream that was pure, primal fury. Ava kicked the chair, toppling it. She fell hard onto her side, the impact jarring her to the bone, but she was free of Vincent's body. She stretched, her fingers straining, her hands still tied behind her back. It was too far. The gunman chambered his round. He smiled, his teeth yellow. "Bye-bye, boss." Ava lunged, rolling, her bound hands grabbing the heavy, cold steel of Rico's gun. She didn't know how to hold it. She didn't know how to aim. She just twisted her body, pointing the weapon at the man, and pulled the trigger. The gun roared in her hands, a living, bucking thing. The sound was deafening. The man's smile vanished. He looked surprised. He crumpled to the floor, a smoking hole in his chest. Silence. The room was filled with smoke and the smell of cordite. Ava was sobbing, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. She was alive. They were alive. Outside, in the distance. A new sound. Sirens. Not one, a dozen. They were getting closer. Vincent, leaning against the wall, a dark pool of blood forming at his feet, looked at her. He was in agony, but he was smiling. "You," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You made an anonymous tip. The police." "Rico broke the code," Vincent said. "He brought in this. He had to be cleaned up. Permanently. He had tipped off the police. He hadn't just come for a rescue. He had come to end the Serpentine organization, once and for all, using the law as his final, bloodiest weapon." He slid down the wall, his strength finally gone. He collapsed onto the floor. "Vincent!" Ava screamed. She was still tied. She kicked and writhed, desperate. "No, no, no." He looked at her, his eyes dimming. He was pale, a grayish tint under his skin. He had lost too much blood. She finally broke the ropes on the rough edge of the broken chair leg. She scrambled to him, her hands bloody, her leg on fire. She crawled into his lap, pulling his head onto her chest. "You can't," she sobbed, her tears raining down on his face. "You can't leave me. You promised I was safe." He coughed, a wet, bloody sound. His hand, weak, came up to touch her cheek. His fingers were cold. He smiled, a real smile this time, one that lit his eyes. "Told you," he whispered, his blood staining his lips. "You'd only sleep in my bed." His eyes closed. Weeks later, the sign on the door was simple: The Haven. It smelled of fresh paint, new ground coffee and vanilla. It was a small cafe, all warm woods and soft light. Ava moved between the tables, a pot of coffee in her hand. Her limp was almost gone. The bruise on her face had faded to a faint yellow shadow. She was wearing a simple yellow apron, and she was, for the first time in her life, smiling. It was a real smile. It reached her eyes, and it lit up the entire room in a dark, quiet booth in the back. Vincent Romano watched her. His arm was in a sling, his suit jacket draped over his shoulders. He was thinner, paler, but he was alive. 2 of his men sat at the counter, quiet, watchful, pretending to read newspapers. Ava finished pouring, and her eyes found his. The smile, if possible, grew warmer. She walked to his booth, setting the pot down. She slid into the seat opposite him. He just looked at her, his gaze a tangible thing. He had almost died. He had spent 2 weeks in a private hospital, a world of pain and antibiotics, and every time he woke, she had been there, asleep in the chair, her hand on his. "You're safe," he said, his voice still a little rough. She reached across the table, her hand covering his. She didn't say anything. She just leaned in, brushing her lips against his. It was a soft kiss, a kiss of promises kept, of a new, terrifying, beautiful morning. She pulled back, her eyes shining. "Only," she whispered, "because you didn't let me die. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We are so glad you were here for the entire journey. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and say hello. If you loved Ava and Vincent's story, please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Romance Stories, for new chapters and new tales every week. And finally, let us know what you thought of the ending. We read all of your comments in English. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next story.